On the morning of January 4th, 1933, the French luxury liner L'Atlantique, manned by just a skeleton crew, was sailing through a storm in the English Channel on her way to a refit. At around 4:30, a lone seaman was patrolling her empty passenger spaces on E-deck when he noticed the slight smell of smoke. He followed the smell to cabin E-232, where he found smoke seeping through the cracks in the door. He immediately ran to raise the alarm, and crews were quickly assembled to address the situation, but their efforts would be futile. Just over half an hour after the small fire was discovered, it will spread all over the ship, turning the lavish Art Deco masterpiece into a floating inferno. So you might have noticed me struggling to pronounce some of the French words in this video. I clearly need to brush up on my French, and this is my hopefully not awkward segue into this video's sponsor, Babbel. A few years ago, I took my first trip to Paris. I absolutely fell in love with the city, but something kind of awkward happened in the Paris metro. Two separate people stopped me to ask for directions. With my very basic French, I could only muster a simple "je suis désolé" or "je ne sais pas," but that clearly wasn't enough. I promised myself that when I return to the city, I want to be able to actually engage in conversations. So this fall, I'm embracing the season of learning and carving out time to study French with Babbel. Babbel is one of the world's most popular language learning apps with over 10 million subscribers. Their lessons are designed by real language teachers, and they're scientifically proven to help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. There are so many ways to learn, from flashcards and engaging lessons, to even real-world conversations that let you practice the language in practical scenarios you would encounter in real life. There are few things more enriching than learning a new language. And now, if you follow the link in my description, you can get started on your language learning journey with 60% off your subscription with Babbel. Let me know in the comments below what language you'd like to learn. Merci et maintenant de retour à l'Atlantique. On July 11, 1911, the French government signed a contract with what would soon become the Compagnie de Navigation Sud-Atlantique. The 25-year agreement would provide postal subsidies for the company to operate round-trip voyages between France and South America. Sud-Atlantique was an unlucky company from the start, and while their agreement with the French government stipulated that they maintain at least 4 intermediate French-built vessels, their losses in World War I put that threshold out of reach, and by 1928 they were left with just the Lutetia and the Massilia, 2 decent but largely unremarkable vessels. Meanwhile, their German rivals were dominating the South American routes with larger, faster, and more luxurious liners. But the French government was eager to maintain and develop trade with South America. Discussions began in February 1926 on plans to stabilize the struggling company and increase French influence in the area. An agreement was ratified on April 1928 to subsidize the construction of 2 new liners that would be larger and far more luxurious than any of the competition. The keel was laid for the first of these 2 liners on November 28, 1928, at the Penot shipyard in Saint-Nazaire. The new liner's draft would be constrained by both the Gironde River in Bordeaux and the channels at La Plata between Argentina and Uruguay. In order to access these shallower ports, she was designed with very little shear and camber, meaning she had very little curvature in her hull, and she was given an abnormally wide beam of 92 feet or 28 meters compared to her length of 733 feet or 223 meters. This gave the 42,512-ton liner a draft of just 8 meters. Her wider beam also made her more stable and allowed for a large, bulky superstructure, yielding some awkward proportions, especially with her first set of 3 squat funnels. Her launch was scheduled for April 14, 1930. After speeches by French officials and a brief religious ceremony, Marguerite Cyprien Fabre smashed a bottle of French champagne over her bow and officially named her L'Atlantique. But high winds left launch engineers with no choice but to postpone the launch, and her hull sat on the slipway another day. She was launched without much ceremony on April 15. Feels almost like they wanted their ship to be cursed. Over the next 16 months, she was fitted out with some of the finest Art Deco accommodations ever put to sea. While they would ultimately prove inadequate, L'Atlantique was equipped with numerous safety features that were well beyond what was required by law at the time. These included a double bottom that was subdivided into 35 watertight compartments and a double shell surrounding her engines and her boiler rooms. Her upper decks were equipped with fire bulkheads and 13 steel asbestos-coated curtains that could be deployed in an emergency. She was also equipped with fire extinguishing equipment that could disperse either seawater, steam, carbonic acid gas, or foam, depending on their location within the ship. Her passenger accommodations were some of the best available at the time, rivaling even liners on the North Atlantic routes. She could carry 488 passengers in first class, 88 in second, and 662 in third. She was operated by a crew of 663, and she was powered by 4 Parsons steam turbines that produced 55,000 shaft horsepower and drove 4 screws to achieve a 21-knot service speed. 2 architects were tasked with designing her interiors, Raguenet et Millard and Pierre Petot, one of the most prominent figures of the Art Deco movement and the designer responsible for both the Ile-de-France and the Normandy. She was designed with divided uptakes in her first and second funnel, which allowed massive, uninterrupted public spaces that ran almost the full length of the ship. The majority of these grand spaces were located on B deck, starting with her oval salon, which featured a massive chandelier that reached into A deck and flanked by 10 varnished rosewood columns. This led into her grand salon or music room. This 72 by 66 foot room with 24-foot ceilings was decorated with pink and forest green marble. The space featured 7 massive floor-to-ceiling windows that were paneled in golden glass, creating a shimmering effect in the daytime. But the most incredible of these spaces was her dining saloon, which was accessed through a sweeping grand staircase that led passengers from the grand salon on B deck down to the 35-meter long and 20-meter wide room that spanned 3 decks with a dome reaching into A deck. The space was decorated in gold and burled mahogany, with large panels of art and lacquer on every wall. It was truly breathtaking. Every inch of her first-class spaces was an artistic masterpiece, from the sprawling street of peace that featured 46 separate shops, to her first-class cabins, which featured a large number of private bathrooms. There wasn't a single inside cabin in either her first or second class, an extremely rare feature for the time. All in all, L'Atlantique was a masterpiece on the inside, and a preview of the splendor that would soon come with the Normandy. While her exteriors were somewhat awkward, the press and the traveling public marveled at the new luxury liner, which easily outmatched the competition on the South American routes. But fate would prevent her from ever enjoying the long and fruitful years of service she was designed for. L'Atlantique sailed her maiden voyage on September 29, 1931. Captain Charmazon, an experienced veteran with the Sud-Atlantique line, was chosen to command the new vessel as his final voyage before retirement. After brief calls in Vigo and Lisbon, she sailed for South America, enjoying near-perfect weather. After a 4-day turnaround, she left Buenos Aires for France on the 17th, arriving on the 31st, making for a 33-day total round trip. Captain René Schooss assumed command on subsequent voyages. While she was widely praised for her size, speed, and incredible luxury, the Great Depression made her less popular with passengers than her owners would have hoped. Several early modifications were made. Her squat funnels proved ineffectual at directing soot away from her passenger decks. They were also pretty ugly. So in 1932, it was decided to add an additional 7 meters to their height, making them 19 meters tall. The changes did a lot to improve her profile, but this would soon prove irrelevant, shortly after her 10th and final voyage was completed on December 29, 1932. On January 3, 1933, L'Atlantique left her terminal in Pauillac to undergo a refit in Le Havre. She was under the command of Captain Schooss and operated by a skeleton crew of 229. Almost immediately, the liner encountered rough weather as she entered the English Channel. Without passengers or cargo, she was running light in the water, causing her to roll more dramatically in the heavy seas. By that evening, even her engine room staff was finding it difficult to move around. At around 4:30 on the morning of January 4th, a seaman named Ramondia was making his rounds on E-deck when he noticed the faint smell of smoke. He soon found the smell was coming from cabin E-232. He quickly alerted 2 other seamen, and they immediately raised a fire alarm and alerted the bridge. Within minutes, Captain Schooss was awake and returned to the bridge. He soon took the lift to assess the situation. They were horrified to find that the corridor was already filled with thick black smoke. A firefighting team was quickly assembled and dispatched to the area, where everyone was forced to don face masks. At almost the same time, engineering officer Paul Dejoie also noticed the smell of smoke in the engine room, and he soon went to investigate himself. He found that the area that stored fuel above the boilers was filled with smoke, but the deck wasn't hot. He concluded that the source of the smoke must be from higher up in the ship. Almost as soon as he made that determination, alarm bells went off, signaling the emergency. The fire crew on E-deck opened the doors to cabin E-232 and the adjoining cabin E-234. The smoke inside was too dense to allow the crew to enter. In an attempt to disperse some of the thick smoke, the captain ordered all doors and portholes in the area open so they could better assess the damage and locate the fire. Soon, additional fires were found in the first-class hull and on C-deck, but by 5 a.m., it seemed the situation might be under control. While crews around the ship handled the various fires, Captain Schuss returned to the bridge and altered their course in an attempt to reduce the heavy rolling. First Officer Gustave Gaston, who remained on E-deck, soon called up to the bridge to alert the captain that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Fire was now spreading all over the ship. The captain ordered all available crew to assist in fighting the blaze, led by a crew member named Hector Curie. But their efforts were proving futile, as even their face masks were proving inadequate against the thick black smoke that was now filling much of the ship. All around them, the heavily varnished wood panels were spontaneously bursting into flames. Her grand central spaces now acted as a perfect channel to spread the blaze. Fire moved unchecked from room to room. Her many fine decorations, paints, and carpets ignited almost all at once, all around the desperate crew members. The inferno burned so intensely that her hull and deck plates were already beginning to buckle and warp. The fight to bring the blaze under control now became a fight for survival. It was soon realized that an engineer, Jean Depin, hadn't been seen since before the emergency began. Gaston volunteered to go below to his cabin to locate the missing man. By the time he reached Depin's cabin, he was overcome by the smoke and collapsed. Depin dragged him inside the cabin, and the two men were now trapped as the flames raced through the corridor. In a stroke of luck, the phone lines were still working. They were able to call the bridge and ask for a rope ladder to be lowered to their porthole, where the two men squeezed outside and climbed up on deck. Meanwhile, Curie and the crew below pumped gallons of seawater on the raging fire, while engineers fought to keep the pumps working. The intake of water soon gave the liner a 15-degree list. Flames were now shooting out of the forward section of the ship, and the large windows of her great salons were shattering, allowing a massive amount of air to flow through the ship and fan the inferno. Curie was forced to repeatedly run into the fire to rescue men as they collapsed from the smoke and exhaustion. He had his crew hose him down before running back into the blaze one last time to try and seal a fire door. This time, he didn't come back. By now, several vessels in the area had responded to the distress calls and were racing to the scene. As dawn soon filled the bridge with daylight, Captain Schuss realized that saving his ship was hopeless. His responsibilities were now to save his crew, and at 7:45 he ordered an abandoned ship. Strong winds and the now considerable 20-degree list made it impossible to lower her port lifeboats. Her starboard boats were hastily prepared. Down below in her engine rooms, crews attempted to shut down her boilers to reduce the risk of an explosion, but the smoke was so dense that they couldn't reach her forward boiler room. Engineering Officer Dejoie was forced to shut off ventilation to these forward rooms and send a message to the men still working in them, ordering them to evacuate. He then assembled the remaining engineering officers and crew, and together they navigated the perilous smoke-filled passageways up to the deck. In the chaos, 3 men were separated from the group and lost. They were only found long after the disaster, all 3 having died from smoke inhalation. Dejoie and his men gathered at their muster station at Lifeboat 15. After the men boarded, Dejoie started the winch to lower the lifeboat. But soon, fire spread all around him, forcing Dejoie away from the winch. He had no choice but to leap out and climb down the lines to the half-lowered boat as flames burst out all around him. Soon the fire burned through the cable, spilling the men into the churning sea 30 feet below. With little other choice, men began jumping into the sea, where they were soon picked up by lifeboats from the surrounding rescue ships. As the morning light grew, the small group of men left on board were trapped on the forecastle, one of the only areas not yet engulfed in flames. These men included Captain Schuss and First Officer Gaston. Once the Dutch cargo ship Achilles was assured that there was almost no risk of an explosion, they got as close to the liner as possible and sent their lifeboats to rescue the remaining men. Captain Schuff's was the last to leave as the husk of his once mighty luxury liner smoldered in the morning light. In total, 19 men died in the fire that destroyed L'Atlantique. It's extremely fortunate that the disaster happened when she wasn't carrying passengers. The speed and ferocity of the blaze would have almost certainly claimed hundreds of lives. While the exact cause of the fire remains unknown, theories include everything from faulty electric wiring to sabotage. But there's no concrete evidence to substantiate any one cause, though it's clear that her design and materials used throughout the ship greatly exacerbated the situation. And while the crew acted heroically, some actions, like opening portholes and doors, inadvertently helped accelerate the fire. Horrified by the disaster, French authorities passed a new set of fire safety regulations in 1935. Wood was banned from critical areas like stairs and lift shafts. Carpets and wall hangings had to be treated with fire retardant, crews had to be trained in firefighting, and vessels over 15,000 tons had to carry 3 professional firefighters. After a lengthy battle between her owners and her underwriters on whether the liner was a total loss, her owners eventually won when it was agreed that her wreck was beyond repair. What was left of the hull was finally scrapped in February 1936. In the decade between 1932 and 1942, 5 French ocean liners were destroyed by fire: the Georges Philippard, the Lafayette, the Paris, the Normandy, and L'Atlantique. The grandeur and artistry that made many of these liners so incredibly special was also what ultimately destroyed them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, help out the channel by leaving a like and comment down below. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button for more ocean liner history. Thank you again to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Check them out in the link below for 60% off your subscription. I'd also like to give a special thank you to my patrons for helping make this video possible. If you'd like to help this channel grow, consider joining the Big Ol' Boats crew over on Patreon, where you get special perks like behind the scenes updates and early access to videos. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.